So we are recording this session. This is the Bay Area Urban Ants presentation, and we have with us Dr. Mara Vonschak, who's an ant specialist in the Bay Area, and she's going to lead us through a presentation on Bay Area ants, urban ants, and also give us an activity regarding with baits, how to attract ants to baits and take photographs and then share those photographs for identification. And then she's also going to talk a little bit about the natural history of ants. Well, I'll get it started with what ISMC is. We are the Insect Sciences Museum of California, and I'll just take you through our PowerPoint a little bit. So we've been photographing insects of the Bay Area since about '97, and we've got a number of locations where we've got projects going on. But some of the photographs that we're getting are really great. And this is what we're emphasizing is photography of insects. Because we don't know what's here. And if we have a picture, that's helpful. So we've got locations all throughout California. We've even been down to the Mojave Desert. But most of our activity is centralized around the Bay Area. We've been writing field guides for each one of these sites. So this is an example of a field guide, a front cover. For the Modini Mayacamas Preserves in Marin County. So in addition to our field guides, we also have a virtual field guide, which we print the pages out into either 11 by 17 or 4 by 6 and have those at our events. And we do have events. This is our annual bug camp. I think this is 2018. Harley, what year was this?
I believe that was 2018.
Yeah. So we had a visitor even from Germany. And then we have Elizabeth and we have Clay. Looking at something. Then we have different events out in the field. This is Coyote Hills in Fremont, and we have a display and table out there. We also let an insect hike, and then we have different displays around the city of Oakland. This is also a virtual field guide for the park, and this is Joaquin Miller Park. This is also Joaquin Miller Park. We have a lot of people joining us. Then we have a virtual bug collection. Which can be handled by children or other people. Let's have Marav talk about her group, which is the BioBlitz Club. Marav, tell us what a BioBlitz is.
Okay, so yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for coming. So a BioBlitz is an event where we get lots of people into a park or a nature preserve or an open space or anything like that. And we try and document as many species as possible of different animals and plants and mushrooms and everything we can find. And we use iNaturalist, which is a free smartphone app, to document all our observations. And it's really fun. It's a different way of taking people out and teaching natural history and showing people native species and non-native species and all sorts of interesting things. And obviously, all that is now gone because we can't hold any public events. But one day, hopefully, we'll be back there. So you could check out all these different events. And also, now I have all sorts of online events like this presentation and online walks and different things. And you could check it out on my website, bioblitz.club.
The BioBlitz Club is a group that's mostly in Santa Clara Valley.
Yes, it's in the South Bay, and I've organized so far 39 BioBlitz events and many, nature walks, insects walks, gull walks, different things. Yeah, let's maybe talk quickly about the program for today. So we'll start with talking a little bit about the baits, because that's what we're supposed to do in a couple of minutes. And then once we're back from that, I'll do a little presentation about different species of ants we find in the Bay Area, what you might find at home or what you might have in your yard. And then after that, we'll go and check the baits. So if you'd like, you could set your own baits. I'll explain in a minute. It takes a couple of minutes to make them and set them up. So you could do that. And the good thing about baits is that it's just a really easy way to find ants and photograph them. Okay, the baits, I place them on a white piece of paper, so it gives a really good contrast to the ant. And then it's just easier to photograph them because they don't move that much. They're busy. You always want to photograph ants when they're busy. my team. But anyway, so you could set your own baits, or you could join me, and I'll just, log in through my smartphone, and I could take you out to my yard and look for ants on the baits that I will set in a minute. And then we'll have time to share some photos of the ants you had on your baits, ants you photographed last week or 2 years ago. And we can try and help you identify them. Sometimes it's possible. It's not always possible, but I'm really happy to try. And we'll talk a little bit about the BioBlitz Club, about the Insect Museum, about Jasper Ridge, and a lot about ants. Okay, so let me say a couple of things about baits, and then I'll go out and set mine. So as I said, baits are just an awesome way to attract ants. And I usually set them in places where I see ants, because then obviously I have higher chances of finding them. But also you could place a bait along. So if we're talking about the street, then you could set them by the sidewalk. Ants and many insects walk along straight lines. Like if there's a fence or something like that, they'll walk along the fence, and you could place your bait there. You could place it at the base of a big tree. If you have a coast live oak, that's an awesome tree for ants. So that's where I'm going to place mine, actually near a huge coast live oak. The bait is basically just a regular piece of paper, and I use sugar water in the same consistency that I make for hummingbirds. So 1 part of sugar and 4 parts of water. And if you just make a little bit, you could use 1 teaspoon of sugar and 4 teaspoons of water. And if you have a little pipette, you could use that. But even with a little spoon or something like that, just put a little drop on each piece of paper. You could also put, if you have tuna fish, that's all ants' favorite. But otherwise, you could use cookies, chocolate, nuts. Ants like everything. Some ants, it's good to use a couple of different things, because some ants would like the sugars, others would like the fat or the protein. So that's why it's often good to use 2 different things. And now I'll stop talking. I'll go out, place my baits. Eddie will talk to you about other things if you're not going to place your baits, and then I'll see you in 2 minutes. Okay?
Okay. Thank you, Merav.
Cool. See you soon.
I've seen some questions coming in through the chat. Andrea is saying to everyone, the BioBlitzes are the best. The BioBlitzes are awesome. What we do is we go out and we photograph insects, photograph everything that's there, and then we load them up to iNaturalist. And sometimes we do what's called a wrap, which we sit down at the big screen TV and watch the insects roll in, and then make comments or do the identifications right then. And then Daniel Gordon is saying, is that you that was just talking? Asking about Joaquin Miller Park? Yeah, okay, so we have a few displays up at Joaquin Miller Park where the Insect Sciences Museum is based, but we don't have staff there. And we're still updating the displays there to be more insect-centric. There are other things in the ranger station. It's not a very well-kept ranger station, but the city of Oakland gives us our space free, so we're not complaining. And then let's see, the Insect Museum website link, Mary Ann is asking about that, and that's just bugpeople.org. Now, we just had our website crash, so everything there might not be 100%. If you have any questions, you can email me at Eddie, E-D-D-I-E, at bugpeople.org. That's Eddie, E-D-D-I-E, at bugpeople.org. And then let's see. Oh, yeah. So for a later part in the presentation, we're going to be looking at insect photographs that were submitted for identification. And Merav, did you get to see the album where I posted some ant photos?
No, not yet. So how about you post a link here to the album, and then we'll have a look at that later?
Okay. All right. Let me do that real quick. Just give me a sec.
Okay, so did people have a chance to place their baits? Are we missing someone? I guess we wouldn't know, right? If someone is still out there placing their baits.
Yeah, they won't be able to respond.
Okay, so how about we get started and then they could join us later. If you could make me host, I'll share my presentation.
Okay. You are host.
Awesome. Okay. Just a second. Okay. So, can you see my presentation?
I can see it.
Yes.
Okay. Great, thank you. Okay, so I'd like to talk about ants, obviously, but I kind of like to make it into a discussion. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask them. If it will be too much, then I'll ask you, save the questions to the end. But otherwise, if you have questions or interesting comments, we could do that while we go. And again, if it will be too much, we'll just do it at the end. But we could try that. I think that will be more fun because otherwise it's just me talking to my screen and it's a bit bizarre. Yeah. So, and if you have questions that you'd like to ask at the end, you could also write them in the chat or write it to yourself as a note, and we'll have some time for that as well. So we'll do the presentation, which is a little bit about ants in general, and then just a second, I need to make sure nobody is waiting for us, right, in the waiting room.
Yeah, you'll have to keep that, keep your eyes on that periodically.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where that is though. Okay, no, it was just a chat because something popped up. Okay, awesome. So yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about ants in general, and I'll talk about specific species that you might see at home, in your yard, or when you go out hiking. And I'll try to, separate ants into these categories. But of course, they travel from one category to the next. Okay, and then we'll have time to look at the baits and all that as well, and photos. Okay, so let's get started. So we had our time to go out and look for baits. This is how my baits look like sometimes when the ants are happy and cooperate well. Hopefully today we'll get something similar. We'll see. And okay. So in general, how many ant species do you think are out there? I think most people, if they have no knowledge, they think there's, all the ants are just the same, little black things. And if they're a bit advanced, they'd say, oh no, they're the black ones and the red ones. And, or, small black ones, big red ones, whatever. But no, they're actually closer to something between 12,000 to 15,000 ant species worldwide, which I think is amazing. And most people are totally unaware that there's more than one thing called an ant. And in California, we have about 280 species, depending who you ask, but something like that, 200 and something species, which is useful to know. And obviously, I'll talk about the most common ones. There are many more species even in our area. And yeah. So a little bit about the ant morphology. So this is a really cool ant that we don't have in our area. And some of the photos I'm going to use were taken by Alex Wild, who is an amazing insect photographer. And I got his permission to use his photos. So here you could see a beautiful view of an ant body parts. And this one, it's called a bulldog ant, which is really awesome in Australia. It has these huge mandibles. If someone could mute their...
Somebody's dog is barking.
Yeah, someone's dog is barking. If you're not talking, just mute yourself, please. And if you have something to say, please unmute yourself. Okay, so the ants have mandibles to do all their little work. They don't use their hands, unlike, cartoons. They can't use their hands for anything, so they use their mandibles. Some of them have big eyes, like this one, mostly predator ants. Will have big eyes. Others will have tiny eyes or no eyes at all. They have 3 pairs of legs, obviously, like all insects. And then they have this important body part between the thorax, the middle part, and the abdomen or gaster, the farthest part. They have one, two, or no little things called petioles, okay, that connect the abdomen to the thorax. And I just want to mention that because it's really helpful when you try to identify ants. And then reproductive ants, like queens and males, will also have wings usually at some part of their life cycle. So the queen and the male will start with wings, and then the queens would take them off. And we won't get too much into ant reproductive, even though it's amazing. So we might need to have another presentation just about that, about ant biology. It's just fascinating. And then we have the workers that are sterile. Okay, so all these might be in the same nest at the same time for a short period of time. But most of the time when we look at ants, we just see workers that are all females. Okay, so don't call them guys because they are all ladies. And then in an ant nest, we might have one queen, which is usually the case in like big carpenter ant nests, harvester ant nests. But then some other species might have 2, 3, or even hundreds of queens, like the Argentine ants that might have many, many queens in the same time, and they all reproduce. So that's why they could make these humongous nests. And then when we look at ant morphology, it's also important to note that in some species, all the workers are kind of the same size. So when you look at an Argentine ant nest, all the workers will be roughly the same size. But then when you look at other species, then like this is red-imported fire ant. This is not Argentine ant, it's a different species. And then this is the red-imported fire ant that has like a polymorphic worker cast. So in the same nest, you might have workers in different size. And then some species, like this big-headed ant, are also different because they would have 2 different size range. They'll have the small workers, and then they have workers that look kind of similar, but with a huge head. This is the big-headed ant, and we have a different species in the Bay Area. It's similar, but not as exciting. Well, no, they are exciting, but just the difference is not as huge. And then I just want to briefly mention the ant's life cycle. So in the nest, we have a queen that will take off her wings once she mates, and then she'll start laying eggs. And the eggs will develop into larvae, and you could see they can't do anything. So they are completely dependent on the workers in most ant species to feed them. They also have a pupa stage. So just like butterflies, they have complete metamorphosis, okay, with 4 different stages. And then these pupa will develop to either a worker, a male, or a queen. And why they would develop to each of these is a different presentation, which is amazing some other time. Okay, so these queens would often go out flying on a nuptial flight to find new nests, and that's how you get new ant colonies. And yeah, let's just briefly go over this, because I want to show you how an ant nest would look like. So sometimes it would look like the one on the top right, you know, like a cartoon ant nest, which is kind of cute with all these, you know, little soil particles. But then most of the ant nests in the Bay Area, they really don't look like that. Most of our common species would just have like a tiny hole in the ground, and that's it. Not much more than that, unfortunately. But then some ants, once you start looking for them, you'll realize that some of them are kind of characteristic. So the one here on the bottom right, this is a black harvester ant nest, and the entrance is just a little hole, but then they often will have all sorts of like seed
husks.
Yeah, husks. Thank you. Around the nest, the wind will blow it away from time to time, but there'll be something around the nest. So these are pretty easy to identify because the ants are often not active. They're active when it's not too hot and too dry for them. But if you know how to identify the nest, then you can find the ants. The same with this nest on the left. This is a carpenter ant nest. So at first it doesn't look like much, but once you learn how to identify it, it's actually kind of easy to see them, because often they'll be like they'll clear trails around the nest. So where they walk a lot, these ants, they'll clear the vegetation and even some of the soil to make it more convenient or something. And they'll have more than one opening. You can see a few different large openings for this nest. And there could be a few more nearby. And these ants are active at night, but if you can identify the nest, then you might notice it, and then you could kind of make them go out just to see if the nest is active. So you could blow some air inside, and then they'll come out charging like really, really mad. So, be prepared for that. But it's kind of awesome. Okay, and let's talk about ants. So these are all actually Argentine ants, but I like these photos because they're fun. I think it's like a gummy bear or something, the one in the middle. Okay, so first I'd like to talk about the 4 non-native species we have in the Bay Area. There might be more, but for now we know of at least these 4. So we have the Argentine ant, which is the most common one, and I'll talk a bit more about each of them later. We have the crazy ants. Well, their common names are kind of silly. Moorish sneaking ant, who came out with that, and the immigrant pavement ant, which is actually a good common name because they are immigrant and they do live in the pavement. So that one does make sense. Okay, so as I said, I divided the ants into 3 different groups. So some ants that you might find at home, like Argentine ants, like the odorous house ant, it's the second one here. The pavement ant sometimes could come inside. And a couple of others, and then some other ants, both these species, and in addition, some other species that you might find when you go out for a walk. Because, while sheltering in place, you might start walking around your block like I do. And then you might find some interesting ants, actually. So some of them are non-native in red, but many other ants are actually native ants, and some are even rare when you go to an open space or a nature preserve, but they're doing pretty well in the city, interestingly. So, you might find some cool ants in your neighborhood. And before we get started, I want to say a couple of words about the Jasper Ridge Ant Survey, because this is why I prepared this presentation. So, in Jasper Ridge, which is a closed preserve that belongs to Stanford, it's a few minutes away from Palo Alto. In 1993, the Gordon Lab at Stanford started an ant survey documenting the invasion of the Argentine ant into Jasper Ridge. And each May and September, a graduate student would walk the entire preserve and document all ant species in about 250 points. So yeah, imagine that. It would take about 30 days to cover the entire place. And that was before, we knew how many mountain lions are out there. Anyway, nowadays, this whole study is being done by a group of docents and volunteers, and some of them are actually here today listening to this presentation. So twice a year, we still meet and we do a little training for half a day, and we do a similar presentation talking about the different ants we might see and how we do the survey. We get lunch. And we hike the preserve, and then on another Saturday we go out, and each small group gets a little section of the preserve, and they document all ants in about 10 to 15 points of these green dots here, using the same methods that the graduate students used to do. So it's called visual search, basically going to that area and looking for ants for 5 minutes, which is a very, very efficient way. And just to show you a little bit about what we find. So all these red things are where we found Argentine ants, and the darker they are, that means that we found Argentine ants there more times. So you could see that Argentine ants are mostly found on the boundaries of the preserve, because that's where there are buildings that we think support the ants when it gets too cold in the winter or too hot and dry in the summer. And obviously I have plenty to say about this, but we could move on. The ant survey is really, really fun. This is our training. So we put some ants in petri dishes to show people. And we have some books and some other resources. And it's nice. It's really fun. We have a very nice community of people that join our surveys year after year, and we love to get new volunteers. So if you're interested, email me at the end, and I'm happy to add you to our mailing list. So you'll get info about that. And yeah, this is a group from a few years ago. It's really awesome. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Ant ID. So again, this is the Ant body part. And one important thing that I'd like to note here is that when we look at ants, sometimes you don't really know actually if it's an ant or it's something else. Even for ant taxonomists, ant specialists who are trying to identify ants, you might mistake other creatures to be ants, mostly wasps, but some spiders, bugs are really good ant mimics. So they would try and imitate ants to avoid being eaten by other things, because ants don't taste good and they're really nasty. So many things would try and look for ants, like ants. And a good way to identify an ant is to look at the antenna. So ants typically have this elbow-shaped antenna, and that's a really good characteristic. They might have a big eye, a little eye, or no eye, and usually they'll have at least one of these little bumps here, called petiole and then post-petiole. And these are useful for ID, because if you look at this slide, then these are the three most common subfamilies. Okay, so ants are a family in the Hymenoptera order, which includes bees and wasps and ants. And the ants are just one family, and in it there are many subfamilies. These are the most common ones, and the easiest way to identify them is looking at these little nodes here. Okay, so this one is called myrmidon ants, and it's a huge group of ants. It has many of the common species that we have here. This is and they have two little bumps, petiole and postpetiole. And then we have the formicine ants that have only one little bump. Okay, only one petiole here. They don't have a sting, unlike the first group. They don't have a sting, but they will try and bite you if they're big enough, like the big carpenter ants and even formica, but the big carpenter ants will definitely try to bite you, and then they can spray formic acid on you, which is kind of fun. I mean, you don't really feel it, but they do smell. You could easily smell the formic acid, and you could feel their bite sometimes. And then the third group here is the Dolichoderina ants, the smelly ants. So these ants actually smell good for an ant. Some people get very disappointed. But for an ant, they do smell good, because the other option is to have formic acid, which doesn't smell good. So these ants, the third group, they smell kind of sweet. So we have the odorous house ant or the banana cream pie ant, same thing. That smells kind of sweet. And smell is actually a really good characteristic when you try to identify ants. It's kind of fun to let kids, smell ants and tell them that it's a good way to identify them. Some people would try to taste them. As a vegetarian myself, I don't do that, but you are most welcome to do it if you're not in a nature preserve. Okay? But you could try your own ants at home. Anyway, so these are some of the species that you might see from this group. The pavement ant, the Moorish sneaking ant, what a hilarious name. A Phaenogaster, big-headed ants, the Veromeso, the harvester ant. Okay, both harvester ants we have in the area. And then in the second group, it's the carpenter ants, the winter ant, a very common native species, the crazy ant, not as common. And then the third group, it's the Argentine ants, the odorous house ant, it's the second one here, Tapinoma. And then velvety tree ants, which are really awesome. Okay, so yeah, let's get started with some ants you might find at home.
Merav, I want to remind
Yes.
you to check the waiting room to make sure there's nobody waiting to get in.
Okay. Where would I see that though?
It would be in the list of participants at the bottom.
Oh, okay, cool. So just a second. So everyone, oh yes, there is someone waiting. Thank you, Eddie.
Sure.
Okay, hi Christy, sorry. My fault. Okay, thank you. Please remind me in like 5 minutes to do it again.
Okay.
But hopefully I'll see it this time, because now I know where to look. Okay, awesome. So let's get started with some ants we might see at home. Okay, So at home, many people report having Argentine ants. So the Argentine ant is the most common non-native species we have here at home. And by the way, all the maps I'm using are from Ant Maps or something like that. I'll have the link somewhere. It's a really awesome website where you could look at ant diversity and ant distribution according to species. It's really awesome. I had the link earlier on a slide, and I can provide that later. So here you could see the Argentine ant distribution map. So all the red stuff is where it's not supposed to be, which is different places, mostly with Mediterranean climate. That's why they're so happy here. And then the green stuff is the native zone. And we think that they arrived to California more than 100 years ago and then started spreading. And today they're very widespread in many urban habitats, but also in semi-natural habitat, which is like a natural habitat close to disturbance, close to buildings, like I showed you in Jasper Ridge. This is where they actually do even better. So we can have many thousands of ants just foraging on the trees in a habitat like that. The nests get huge. They can have millions of workers. And to identify them, you could look at, so we have a queen here and a worker, again, photographed by Alex Wild. So the worker is very small, and you can see the size here, 3 millimeters, which is who knows what in inches, whatever. Sorry. And then, so they're pretty small ants. They're kind of elongated, slender, okay? Not kind of fat, but slender, brown to dark brown. And they often walk fast, even though ant activity really depends on the temperature and time of the day. So they will change their activity during the day. We'll often see them walking on a trail, so they could, if they find a good food source, then they could recruit more workers and have many, many ants foraging to the same food source. But sometimes you just see one, and that could be a bit confusing to just see one ant, okay? And to our next ant. So this is the Moorish sneaking ant, Cardiocondyla mauritanica. It's another a highly invasive ant that invaded many different countries worldwide, but it seems like it doesn't have a very significant ecological impact. Unlike the Argentine ant, that wherever it gets, they are so successful. They build these huge nests with millions of workers, and they outcompete and displace many of the native species. So they would fight them, they would steal their food, they would invade their nests, and take over. So in Jasper Ridge, where we have Argentine ants, all these red zones that you had on the map, there's almost nothing else there because they just kill everything else, or they're better. They are better competing with them. So they get all their food and their nesting places. And then this ant, on the other hand, the Cardiocondyla, is not as bad. It's a sneaking ant. Just kidding. But they have a pretty small nest, and we see them in urban areas, but also you might see them in natural habitat, like in Jasper Ridge. We have them in a few little populations, but they don't seem to have the same devastating impact like the Argentine ant. Another ant you might have at home, which is again a non-native species, is the pavement ant, okay, Tetramorium. Immigrants, they got a new name a few years ago, a new Latin name. They're very common in the Bay Area. They nest in pavements, so you can often see them when you walk on the streets. You might even see them near an open space, like in McClellan Ranch. They nest along the paved trails there. But just like the previous species, it seems like they don't have a huge impact on natural habitats because they are kind of limited to this very disturbed places. So they won't really be able to penetrate deep into natural habitats here, at least as far as we know now. Unlike the Argentine ant, for example, that is polygynous, meaning that it has many queens, this ant actually has one queen per nest, which is unusual for invasive species that usually have many queens and interesting social structure. Another interesting thing about this species is that they're really aggressive. But I mean, most ants are aggressive, but invasive species like the Argentine ants, they would usually attack the local species or anything that is not them. So they won't attack other Argentine ant nests, but they will attack everyone else. And native species usually attack everyone. Okay, they will attack the same species because they could smell different colonies, and they could tell that this is another winter ant colony, but not their colony. So that ant belongs to a different group, and they will attack her, or at least they won't share resources. This ant, the pavement ant, would actually attack other pavement ants, and they get into these huge bubbles. So you could walk on the sidewalk and then see tons of ants, like thousands, or at least many hundreds of ants on the sidewalk. And if you look closer, you'll see these ants fighting each other. I'll show you a photo later. And it's pretty funny to watch. And the last non-native species I want to share is this one. It's the crazy ant, Nailandria, which is a pretty tiny ant, kind of brownish. It kind of looks like a winter ant that I'll show later, but a much smaller version with very long hairs, as you can see here in the photo. Again, it seems like they don't have much impact in natural habitats, but mostly you'll find them in an urban habitat, like probably not in your home, but around your home, in your yard.
Merav,
Okay. Yes.
the top on that one looked like it was native to the U.S. It has the green.
This one? Yeah. Oh, you know what? That is a good point. So they are native to a different section of the U.S. I should check if they have an updated map, but it is a non-native species to our area, but
Okay.
it is native to other places in the U.S. And yeah, thank you. That's a good point.
Oh,
I
thanks.
wonder if they have a better map now. I should just, write a note here. But that's a good point. So it's native to the US, but not to here. Okay? Cool. And sometimes you could actually see that by the ant distribution. So the fact that we never see it in a natural landscape here means that it's probably not native. Probably came from somewhere else, and it could survive in our homes or yards where conditions are different than a natural landscape. Okay, so let's start with some native species. So this is the most common native species in our area, called the winter ant, or it has a few different names. On iNaturalist, it's actually called the small honey ant. And that's because these ants, they really like liquid food. So most ant species are omnivores, which means that they feed on anything. They'll eat dead insects, they'll eat some plant material, some of them would specialize actually on seeds, or there'll be specialized predators, but most ants are kind of omnivores. And then this ant, they really like liquid food. They like honeydew, which is a sweet secretion that little homopterans, little insects like aphids and scale insects and that kind of stuff, they secrete that all the time. And ants, many ant species learn how to use that. They milk them, just like we use cows. They invented that many, many years ago. And they would protect their aphids and build, sometimes some species would build like special structures for them. But anyway, harvester ants that specialize on seeds collect the seeds and store them in their nest. But these ants, they like liquid food, so they store them in their abdomen, in their gaster. And you can see the workers here on the right. And I think one of the kids had a question about that. I read the questions that Eddie posted earlier. So this ant, it's called a small honey ant because they're kind of small, but they do collect that sugar water in their abdomen. In the desert, we have the regular honeypot ants that store lots of liquid food in their abdomen, and they're much bigger also. Okay, so we don't have the regular honeypot here. We have this one, the winter ant. So we call them winter ants because they actually don't like it when it gets too hot. They just hide in the nest for a few months, for the entire summer, and then they'll be back around September. I wonder if we'll see them today. If you place some baits, maybe you'll see them in your yard. Maybe they're already gone. There are common ants in gardens, and they would sometimes get into your home. And they're very common ants when you go out hiking into an open space. You might see them. An interesting thing about them is that they are somewhat tolerant. So they can tolerate the Argent ant invasion in a way. So in places, even in Jasper Ridge, where we have lots of Argent ants, we still have winter ants often. And yeah, really, really cool ants. And they forage. So I note here on these slides that these ants, they nest in the ground and they forage. So they go out looking for food, both on the ground and on vegetation. So you'll often see them on different trees and plants. Okay. And now for the Camponotus. So Camponotus, the carpenter ant, is one of our really cool ants. It's the largest ant we have around. You can see here, these are two workers of the same nest, probably. Okay, so you can see this is a minor worker and that's a major, so it's much bigger head, just like the slide I showed you earlier with the different types of workers. So in this colony, they might have different sizes in the same nest. Many of them nest in the ground, other nest in dead trees. They also really like honeydew and sweets. And in general, they are nocturnal, but early in the morning or, when it's not too hot, they'll still be outside foraging, and late in the afternoon, but at night, it's when they're really active. These are the ants that I mentioned that they don't sting, but they will bite you if they can. And they might try and spray some formic acid on that. The best way to identify them is to hold them with 2 fingers, which is, kind of funny and tricky. Try that. And once you hold them like that, you could look at the shape of the thorax. The thorax is this middle section between the head and the abdomen. And you can see that here it has like an arch shape. And that's the only genus that has that. Okay, we have many different species of carpenter ants in California. And in the Bay Area, there are quite a few. One of them kind of likes to live inside homes. And you might have it in your kitchen. So they don't really eat wood, but they do nest in it. So they might nest behind a cabinet or something like that and kind of chew into it. So usually the nests are not very big, meaning that they won't cause too much damage, but you might not be really happy about them. I always feel like ants are better than pesticides, but that's for you to decide. So again, not a huge damage, but still, they might be there. I have them at home from time to time, but really tiny nests. So our next ant is the odorous house ant, or the banana cream pie ant, Tapinoma. So Tapinoma is a native species that has really interesting behavior. So you can see here from the map that it has really wide distribution just for that one species. It belongs to a different group. So these are the smelly ants, the Dolichotorina ants, which means that they smell very sweet. In order to smell it, you don't need to really crush them, but you could kind of, gently squeeze them and convince them that something happened, and then they release that alarm pheromone, meaning that they're not happy. But it's very helpful when you try to identify them, okay, because they smell very sweet. They're really interesting, lots of stuff to say about them, but let's see if we have time at the end. We can talk about them a little bit more. But anyway, interesting ants. We find them both inside homes, in the yard, sometimes you actually see quite a lot of them on the sidewalk when they move the nest or something like that. And then they're somewhat common species in natural landscapes here. Even though they'll have a smaller nest with just one queen and different behavior than what we see in the city, where they have multiple queens and very large nests, which I think is really interesting. Okay. Another ant that interestingly you might see at home is the beef ant, Solenopsis. So if you're familiar with the ant, Solenopsis is the genus of the red imported fire ant, but this is a different group in that genus, so they're not that closely related. these ants are really tiny. They won't do any damage to you or to your home. They're actually interested in eating other ants, and some people might have them at home. But they're really, really tiny. Usually you actually won't see them because they're called cryptic ants. So it means that they nest underground, but also forage underground. So they don't really come out. You can see they have tiny, tiny, tiny eyes. So that's the best way to identify them, with the tiny eyes, very small size, and also they have very characteristic antenna. Okay? Cool ants, very much more common than we know because they're cryptic. And then now I want to talk about the second group, which is ants we might find in an urban habitat. And this is the other photo I mentioned with the pavement ants. So this is how it looks like when they fight on the sidewalk. You just have hundreds of these ants, and it's sometimes not really clear what they're doing. They're kind of biting each other and doing something. Okay, so ants you might find around home in a yard or on the sidewalk. This is one of the species which I think is really cool. It's called the velvety tree ant. It's actually one of our native species that is found in healthy forests. There are boreal ants, which mean that they nest on trees, usually on the base of a big oak, but sometimes in other places. When the nest gets really big, they will connect a few different trees. So they'll make trails between a few different trees and nest in all of them. And they can have very big nests that live for many years and stay in the same place. Oh, we have someone else waiting for us. Okay, hello, Annette.
Hey, Annette.
I remembered. Well, kind of. Anyway, velvety tree ants. So these are really awesome ants that we see in Jasper Ridge, for example, from time to time. Not very common, not that easy to find. But then a few years ago, I noticed that one of my neighbors had them along the street. And then I got them a few years ago, and I'm really happy to have them. And now they started with this pretty small nest in my coast live oak, and now they connected at least 2 other non-native oaks together. So they have a really huge nest, and hopefully we'll see them later when we go and check the baits. So they're related to the Tapinoma, to the odorous house ant, which means that they also smell great. They smell kind of sweet. Again, for an ant, some people might get disappointed, but for an ant, they smell good. They don't have a sting, so that's why they smell. That's their way to defend themselves. They have polymorphic workers, which means that in the same nest, you might have different, like a whole range of size of workers. Small ones, bigger ones, they all look kind of the same, just different sizes. And you could see from the side view that the legs, so these ants are kind of medium size, and the legs and antenna are not very long compared to other ants we'll see later. So that's useful. And the body is covered with kind of velvety hairs, and they're not shiny. So being shiny or covered with hairs are really important characteristics when you try to identify ants. And their eyes, not too large, but, you know, still there. Okay. So our next species is Aphinogaster, which I don't know what, I think they do have a common name, not sure what it is. Aphinogaster is an interesting species because it's very difficult to find in the natural habitat. It's a native species here. And in Jasper Ridge, for example, we see them sometimes. But then in like downtown Palo Alto, there are some nests that live for many years. And when we need to show these ants on our Jasper Ridge training, then we go and collect from these populations because they're always there. And it would be really difficult to go and find them in Jasper Ridge. So they do well in some areas, even in an urban setting, which is interesting because it's a non-common native species. Oh, we have someone else waiting. It's fun. Welcome. Okay, so our next species is really cute. This is the big-headed ant, Pheidole californica. Pheidole is a huge genus. And this is one species that is kind of local. You can see it's found here in California and in other Western states. The significant thing here is that you have tiny workers and then you have the majors that have the big head. probably they are not really fighting anyone. It's just that they can crush larger seeds. These are very small ants, especially this species. Excuse me. And they collect seeds, just like the harvester ants that collect large seeds. These ants collect tiny, tiny, tiny seeds. And their nest doesn't look like anything. It's just like a tiny little hole in the ground. They're very difficult to find because the ants are very small, but you might find some seed husks around that nest entrance and sometimes some dead insects, because all ants would be happy to eat dead insects as well. They have a pretty large eye, which is helpful to separate them from other tiny ants. And they're kind of orange brownish, like light brown colored. Very cute. And apparently they're also active late at night, which is interesting, because usually when you see them, you just see very few workers, 1, 2, walking slowly. And sometimes at night you might see like much more activity. Oh, and the interesting thing here, one interesting thing here is that you might find them in your yard. My friend Claire had them in her yard in Palo Alto, which I thought was really surprising because I never saw them in an urban setting. But usually you see them in like grassland habitat. Another species that I'd like to mention in this group, and then we'll move to the natural habitat, is the Monomorium. So Monomorium is another very common genus here. There's just this species is found native in California, as far as I remember. But like in the old world, in Africa and somewhat in Europe, there are many more species of Monomorium. Here's just this one that is a native species. It's very, very small. It's black and shiny. You could see here on the flower, like the size. In Jasper Ridge, for example, we never found it. But in downtown Palo Alto, you could find it in different places. Oh, someone else is here. So it's interesting that you can find it in some urban settings and some natural habitats here as well. Very, very small, black, shiny, cute, and sensitive to Argentine ants, as you can see here. Okay. So now I want to mention a few species, a few native species that I haven't mentioned yet, because we spoke about 4 different non-native species, and then some of our native species that might be found at home or in around homes. And now let's talk about species that you usually won't find around your home unless you live in a really nice place, you know, in the mountains or at the side of your settlement. So one important species is the black harvester ant, Veromeso. It used to be called Meso, Andre. And this is a really important granivore ant, which means that they disperse seeds of many of our serpentine grassland plants. So they're really important, but they're also very sensitive to Argentine ant invasion, which means that they're one of the first species to be negatively affected by Argentine ants. In Jasper Ridge, for example, we see them sometimes fighting Argentine ants. We see Argentine ants invading their nests, and that will obviously affect our serpentine endemic plants that we really like.
Let me also mention that the introduction of Argentine ant also in wiping out, well, reducing the the richness of the harvester ants has also led to the decline of a reptile called the horned lizard.
Mm-hmm.
We used to call them horny toads, and their populations have declined.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think that's why invasive ants are so interesting. That's what I studied for my PhD and for my postdoc. Because you introduce one species, in this case, the Argentine ant, and you could affect lizards, and you could affect plants, and you could affect so many different things just by introducing one species. And I think this is a really interesting point here. So yeah, the harvester ants are an important food source for the honey lizards, and yeah, and that's one of the species that got negatively impacted by Argentine ants. Okay, so these ants are called up pretty large. They make big nests, Again, lots of stuff to say about them, but I'll just say that the activity is interesting because they're not active when it's really hot, but they might be active in the middle of the night if it's nice and cool. So you'll see many of them out foraging and being very busy, just looking busy. Another cool native species is the acrobat ant, Chromatogaster. We have a few different species in the area. This one is really cute. They have heart-shaped abdomen. Okay, and when you look at them from the side view, that's the best way to tell a Chromatogaster because their abdomen is connected in a very low, high area to the rest of their body right here. And when you look at it from above, when you look at it from above, you could see that, oh, Elizabeth is here. You could see their heart shape. And then the head is kind of square or boxy. And
we have a person just called. She's in the waiting room.
Yeah, I just let her in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Elizabeth. Awesome. So the other thing I didn't mention yet is that if you learn how to identify some of these ants, whenever you travel somewhere else, you'll see some familiar faces. So not the exact species we have here in the Bay Area, but if you learn how to identify Chromatogaster, they have like their body shape is so specific that even if you go to Australia, you'll see other species of Chromatogaster. You'll be able to tell, oh, that's a Chromatogaster, because they look similar. They might have slightly different colors, slightly different shape, but in general, they'll be similar enough that you could identify them. Okay, so these ants, they don't make huge nests, so you won't see thousands of workers, but sometimes you'll see quite a few of them, and they do walk on trails. So that might be helpful to identify them, or you might see just one. They also really like honeydew, so you often see them near aphids and scale insects. Okay, so our next species is Temnothorax, which is a really tiny ant, and we have quite a few species in the area. Some are nest in the ground, some nest on trees. We often see them on oaks. And the best way to identify them is they just don't move. You usually see them just sitting there, kind of tiny ants. But once you train your eyes to find them, you'll see that they're very common in natural landscapes. So you'll see them on like ferns and like low vegetation. You'll see them on oaks in different places like that. And they usually just don't move. And you'll see one or a couple of them. You never see more than that. Very cool ants and really tiny. So this one is an ant that I have to mention, even though it's not very common. Pseudomyrmex, the twig ant. We call it the Apache of ants because it's so awesome. A Ferrari of ants, sorry. And it looks like a wasp. So it belongs to a different group of ants than the three groups I mentioned in the beginning. It's kind of large, it's elongated, it walks like a wasp, it looks like a wasp. It has large eyes, and we usually find it on manzanitas, and sometimes on a few other plants, but mostly on manzanita because they nest in the manzanita. You can see here there's like a little worker picking from a little hole. So they nest in tunnels made by beetles that eat dead parts of the manzanita bush. And so they don't have very big nests, but they're really awesome and really interesting to find. And once you know where to find them, then you see that they're actually more common than you thought. Very, very cool ants. And another cool ant that I have to mention is this one, Nivermyrmex, which is a native army ant. Okay, so they have this huge male that we call sausage ant that would sometimes come to light at night. And then the ants themselves are very difficult to find. They are cryptic, meaning that they usually both nest in the ground but also forage underground because they also feed on other ants, like the other leaf ant I showed you earlier. But these are much larger. And another interesting thing about them is that we usually the only way to see them is to find dead army ants on harvester ants mounds, because harvester ants, they will take all their trash out all the time. So they take the seeds, but they also take all sorts of insects that they ate and other ants that they either ate or fought or something like that. So often when you look at, not often, but sometimes when you look at their nests, you might find these ants, like dead army ants around a black harvester ant nest, which is pretty awesome. And they're blind because they're cryptic. They don't need eyes. So that's a good way to tell them from other ants. Very cool, very shiny. If you happen to see them walking, they walk very fast. And they would probably sting you happily. Okay, so one of our last species, yeah, I think this is the last species I'll show you. This is Formica, field ant, which is a very common native species, but I think I've never seen it in like an urban area, but very common in an open space. You could see it in the grassland, in the forest, in different habitats. There are many different species. They are active in hot weather, so in the middle of the day when many other ant species are gone hiding, then these ants will still be out there foraging. They run really fast. They don't make a trail like many of our ants. They just kind of wander around. So usually you see just one or two. And if you see plenty of them, you might be stepping on their nest. So, you know, watch out. Because they do bite. They can't sting, but they will bite. And they run kind of fast in a weird way. So they kind of look like a spider when they run fast. They have very long legs and antennas and large eyes, like here in the photo. And when you hold them with 2 fingers, right here, then you could see that unlike that carpenter ant I showed you, they have 2 humps. Because sometimes they might remind you of carpenter ant, because these are also large ants. And then there are 2 different common species in the area. So this one on the right is also a Formica, even though it's shiny and looks a bit different. But both of these species would have this characteristic of like 2 humps from the side view compared with the carpenter ant that has the arc shape. Okay, because some of the Formica species are shiny and general body shape similar to carpenter ant because they're somewhat related. They belong to the same group. They both have kind of triangle, like elongated head and pointy abdomen. Okay, and pretty large, like long legs and antennas. But when you look from the side view, I think that's very helpful. Okay. So again, this is like the general body shape of an ant, and I remind you to look at the antenna if you need to make sure you're actually looking at an ant. And then a couple of things to keep in mind when you look at the ants. So do they walk on a trail? Some ants would make huge trails, like Argentine ants might have thousands of workers. Others, house ants, winter ants, they all make trails, but many other species don't make any trails, like the carpenter ants, the field ants. Another important characteristic is, do they smell? So if they smell kind of sweet, it could be Tepinoma, the other's house ant. It could be the velvety tree ant. If they stink, so, you know, ant researchers, we use aspirator to suck ants, to collect them. And when you collect formitin ants, like the carpenter ant or the field ant, you could really smell that. So that's, you know, helpful when you try to identify them. Then about their movement. So it's important to note if ants move fast or slow, even though that would also depend on the weather conditions. And then the habitat might be kind of helpful. Oh, we have more people. So the habitat is also kind of important because if you're in the grassland, you might find harvester ants or big-headed ants or ants like that. Okay, and then so if you want to find ants, you have to get close to the ground. Look for nests, even though remember that most nests in our area are just a tiny hole in the ground. Very few of them are distinctive, you know, cartoon, cute little nests. You could look for nests for ants activity on tree trunks. So they have favorite plants, like the coast live oak is a great resource for many different ant species, and you can find up to like 6 different ant species foraging on one oak at the same time. you could look under logs and rocks, and you could look on different plants. So in the spring, many plants, even thistle and stuff like that, will have aphids, and aphids are always the best place to find ants, because that's where, you know, the ants go to get their snacks. And then other important plants are coyote brush that have extra floral nectaries to attract ants. So it might have many different species of ants at the same time as well. Okay, so it's important to kind of know your plants when you're looking for ants, and that's true for other insects as well. And it's kind of fun too. Okay, so just to end, there are lots of different resources. I'd love to share them with you afterwards. I prepared like a little list of different things you could use. And I'd love to share it with you. I wrote my email in the chat. You could send me an email and I'll send you that resource. And another thing I'd like to share with you is this flyer that I could either send to you or you could download it from my website. Also, I showed that earlier in the chat. This is a little flyer that I created for the most common ants in our area. You'll see, I think, all the different ants we discussed today. Okay, so both the non-natives and the natives. And you could use that to kind of get started with looking for ants. Again, you could get it from my website. And let's see. So we could open it up now for questions, and then we could do some baits, and then we can have more questions, and we could look at photos and stuff like that. Okay?
And I put, Meredith, I put into the chat the link where people can add their photographs.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I see it now.
Eddie, I just put a question out there. Can somebody reshare the links that were all shared earlier? Because anyone that joined after that did not see them.
Which link?
Okay.
Any of them.
Can you re-include the link for where to share ant pictures with you? Oh, there it is. Eddie just did it. Never mind. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Yeah, wow, I see the photos. Really cool. Okay, so we could share that in a few minutes, but maybe let's see if we have any questions about the presentation. Otherwise, we could do the debates and then we could do the photos.
I'm posting a question from, who was this? Jorge Velasco. Hey, Jorge.
Okay. Yeah, so altitude could definitely affect the ant communities. So like the community structure, which species you'll find in different places. And on high elevation, you'll find different species than you'll find here because the conditions are different. So you'll have, you know, different temperature and humidity, which really affects ants, but also you'll have different plants that would also affect the ants. So definitely, yeah, like when you go, because someone also had questions about species that you see in Tahoe or something like that. So, I mean, depending on the elevation, you'll find different species. And some of them are kind of limited in the distribution. Some species have pretty limited distribution. Other species have very widespread distribution, as you saw in the presentation, depending on the exact conditions they need. Because like some ants are generalists, like obviously invasive species are usually generalists. Like the Argentine ant would nest anywhere and eat anything, and you know, they don't care. Of course, some conditions would be too harsh for them as well, but in general, they could tolerate many different things. And then some species are very specific. They only could survive if they have, you know, the right plant, like that Pseudomyrmex that would need a tree that already has holes made by some other insects because they cannot do them, make them themselves. So they'll depend on many different factors to be able to exist in a place like that. Okay, hopefully that was answering the question. I think someone had, oh, okay, which ants eat carrion, eat dead things. Mm-hmm. So I think many ant species would be happy to eat dead stuff, dead insects for sure, but even like dead animals. And on my first slide, maybe you noticed that there was like a little part of a mouse that we found in Jasper Ridge, and there were 3 or 4 different ant species foraging on that thing. So they found a dead animal that some predator dropped or something, and they were happy to eat that. It's great protein source for them. Even harvester ants would be happy to eat that stuff because they always need more protein. Okay, what else? Feel free to ask your question, or I could try and find them here on the chat. Why do crazy ants called crazy ants? So I think it's just about the way they move. They kind of walk. It doesn't look like they know where they're going. You know, they don't walk in straight line, but they walk kind of sideways, which looks bizarre. So do Argentine ants have natural enemies? They do, just like, you know, anything else. But the problem with invasive species is that they don't belong here. So the animals here, even though some of them would eat them, are not adapted to eating them. So, you know, they kind of taste funny. They come in huge numbers. So sure, some animals would eat them. Some spiders, some lizards might eat them, but not as they would eat them in South America, where they come from, where they have the natural enemies, so which is, you know, different spiders and lizards and maybe birds that would eat them, and also all sorts of like parasitic wasps maybe that would use them. Many ants have parasitic flies that would feed on them, which are really awesome, like the red important fire ants. So all these different things stayed back in South America, and that's why we have such a huge problem.
Someone was asking Merav about when the Jasper Ridge Ant Survey happens.
Okay, so it happens every year in spring and fall, usually around May and around September, October. And we have a mailing list that only, you know, gets active around that time of the year, so you don't get too much, you don't hear too much from us the rest of the year. If you're interested, we could just add you to the list. And then you'll get a notice when we get our dates for the fall. Hopefully we could do like a real ant survey, because in the spring we only got a permit for 4 people to do the entire survey, which was quite interesting. But usually we'll do our training for half a day and then half a day of the survey itself. And quite a few people joined us late. So the Jasper Ridge Ant Survey is a citizen science program happening in Jasper Ridge, Stanford Closed Preserve, twice a year. And it's really fun. It's a great way to learn more about ants and to find other weird people that are interested in ants.
Did you say other weird people?
Yes, I did. And I love that thing. I've been doing it for like 10 years almost. And yeah. I think it's an awesome project. I really love it. Mm-hmm. And it's always interesting, you know, because Jasper Ridge is such a cool place. We always find really nice stuff. Mm-hmm. So not just the ants, you know, but also the ants are awesome. Okay, let's see what the other questions were. Okay, how could we get rid of Argentine ants? It's not that easy, even though the good thing with Argentine ants is that they're only, usually they only come to your home about twice a year. Just a second, let me close the door. Okay, so usually Argentine ants would only come into your home in the middle of the winter when it's very cold and wet outside, and in the middle of the summer when it's very hot and dry outside. And then they'll just leave. But obviously you don't want to spend even that time with them. So one way to get rid of ants in general is to just annoy them. There's not a way to say that, but you know, just disturb them all the time and they would just move to your neighbor, which is, you know, always better. Another thing is that I think you don't really want to use pesticides at home. Like the stuff that kills ants is not good for us. What you can use is baits. So a bait is some food that is attractive to ants, but also has very low toxicity of some insect poison, which means that it doesn't kill the workers instantly, but they have to take it back to the nest and feed it to the queens, and Argentine ants have plenty of queens. So they need to do it over time, and that might be helpful, and you might need to try a few different ones till you find something that they like and they would take it to the nest. You could also, if you find their nest, you could pour some soap water into the nest. It's not toxic to you, but the ants would hate it. So yeah.
Mara, when I was in cooperative extension, we talked a lot about the different seasons that Argentine ant was active and what the pressures on the colonies were. And in the spring, they're creating their brood, so they're looking for protein. And then in the summer, especially during the droughts, we had a really bad drought, a 7-year drought, and I heard reports of people being bitten by Argentine ants, which I'd never heard about before. But then twice I was bitten by Argentine ant in my bed. So the ants were foraging all over the house, individuals, not trails, just individuals. And then in the winter, we heard that that Argentine ants were under stress for food because all the honeydew was washed from the plants, the honeydew producing insects.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, they do change like their activity pattern around the year, and Well, and the only good thing about it is that often they'll just leave your home regardless of what you do. They would leave because they don't need you anymore, but they will be back.
Yeah, no doubt.
Let's see what other questions we had.
So we had a few questions from the Kids Corner. I'm going to put those. I want to put those in the comments.
What is the Kids Corner? Is there like a group of kids that's also on here watching, or?
There is.
How cool.
Yep.
Well, the small black ants is, someone is asking if the small black ants are Argentine ants. So there are quite a few different species that would, look like a small black ant. So some of them, I mean, Argentine ants are not black, they're dark brown. And I try to show the differences between these species. So some of them might be Argentine ants if, they're actually not black, but dark brown. And then there are a few other ants. And we have the winter ants, which is black and about the same size, slightly bigger than an Argentine ant. Okay.
The second question, the second question was about the honeypot ants. So there are they're called small honeypot ants or false honeypot ants or winter ants. It's a Prenolepis imparis that someone thought that they only lived in the desert. And there are two different honeypot ants. There's the false honeypot ant, Prenolepis imparis. Now I've heard that they only store in that cask that does the storage oils and fats. Is that true, or do they actually do honeydew?
So I mentioned that when I talked about winter ants. So winter ants are our most common native species in the area. They're pretty small black ants. They really like honeydew and other sweets, like nectar and sweet liquid food. And the only way to store that is in other workers' abdomen, in their gaster. So just like the honeypots do in the desert, just that genus is much larger. Myrmecocystis is a pretty large ant. Looks kind of like a formica ant, like a field ant. And they have large nests deep in the ground. The winter ants do something similar. So they store, again, liquid food, liquid sugary food in some specialized workers. I don't know if they're even specialized workers, but in workers that stay in the nest, they don't walk like that outside with that big fluffy abdomen. What you do see is that when many ants feed on liquid food, and if you put some sugar water on your bait, you might see that it seems like you have two different kinds of ants, even if they're the same species, because some of them will have stripes. And the stripes is basically the membrane of the ants, because ants and other insects, once they mature, they can't grow larger. They just ants that feed on lots of liquid food, their abdomen might kind of stretch, and then you see the membrane between the cuticle plates. So it looks like stripes, and it's kind of cute. So often you'll see that, and people might mistake that as like a different species or a different kind of ant, but it's just because they're fat and happy.
So we've got 30 minutes left, and we're we're going to do our bait check,
Uh-huh.
and then we're going to discuss the bait findings, photographs, and videos, and hear more about the BioBlitz Club. And I think we kind of covered Jasper Ridge and BioBlitz Club, but if you have anything else we want to add, we'll do that. But we've got to get to our bait findings and do our ant photo identification.
Sounds good. So now what I need to do is to actually connect my phone to the Zoom. So just a second.
What did you use for bait?
I used sugar water, just like the same stuff I use for hummingbirds. So like 1 part of sugar, 4 parts of water, and then I usually add something else. So I add cookies, and I put it on a white piece of paper because it just makes a very good background. You could see the ants easily this way. And yeah, and that's it. And then you place it where you see ants. If you see an ant trail, if you see an ant nest, just, to make sure that you're actually going to see something. But then it's also good to place them in random places where you don't see any ants, but you'd like to find them. Because it's a very good way to find ants where it's just difficult to find them. Empty. This is somewhere I often see ants, but not now. Let's see if we had better luck here. Oh. So yeah, let me know if you could see cute little ant. So I placed this bait near a trail of velvety tree ants that I have in my yard. Can you see the ant?
Yes, we can.
Oh, cool. So this is a velvety tree ant. And this is my bait that had some sugar water and a cookie. And I also placed a couple near the nest. So let's see if that's better. You need some luck with that stuff.
Rob, did you say it's called a velvety tree ant?
Yes.
Ooh.
So,
So some velvet ants are brown. Is that true?
Oh, it's not the same thing as a velvet ant.
Okay, all right.
yeah. Oh, I see. Yeah, velvet ant is something else, which is actually not an ant. So velvet ants are wasps that are really awesome, and the females don't have wings and walk quickly on the ground, so that's why they're called velvet ant. But it's not an ant, and they sting like crazy. But anyway, these ants, wow, they didn't really cooperate this morning. They usually kind of like it when I give them sugar water. But this is my velvety tree ant nest. So this is one of the native species that I have in my yard. They're very cool. They nest inside trees like this one. This nest is so big that they actually connected their nest to the next tree and to another one on the other side of the sidewalk. And they connect these nests with large trails. There is one worker here at the bait. I think maybe I need to put more sugar or something because the sugar is, I think maybe it was too liquidy. But anyway, you can see the ants here. And the good thing with the bait is that they just sit there and they don't move. But here because they're not on the bait, they do move. So probably it's more difficult to see them. Anyway, let's see if we have any more ants here on the other baits. Otherwise, we could walk back. So this one has nothing. Yeah, my baits weren't very successful today. And hopefully I'm not losing reception here. Oh, this one is nicer. Okay. So hopefully you could still see the video. Can you see these ants?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. So you see this bait is in a different part. And these are the pavement ants. Okay. So if you look at this area, it's right next to pavement. I mean, they actually do nest in pavement, these ants. It's right next to the sidewalk, and there's some rocks here, and they often forage here. So these are the pavement ants, and let's see if we can get kind of closer. I have
Just to get a sense of scale, like is that a quarter sheet of paper or how big is that?
Let me put my finger in it.
Oh, okay. That's pretty small.
Yeah, it's a very small piece of paper. The ants are, not the smallest ones. They're larger than Argentine ants and winter ants, but just a bit larger than those. So maybe 4 millimeters. And you can see that they really like the cookie with the sugar water on top. Oh, and now she's trying to bite me. Yes, they like it that much. But anyway, you can see that they're just kind of sitting there, getting their food, and it makes it so much easier to take photos. And also with that white background, it's just really easy. Because often when you try to take photos of ants, it's difficult to get them to stop and to get, a nice photo. So that's why I often take photos of ants carrying heavy weight, because then they walk slower. If they're carrying, a large seed or a large insect or something like that, then they'll walk slowly. Anyway. Breed faster in hot weather. Okay, so Ron is asking if Argentine ants breed faster in hot weather. I think most ants would breed faster in hot weather, and actually ants really like it when it's hot. You could see before it gets too hot and too dry, ants would actually take, so many ants nest in the ground, obviously, and often their nest entrance would be under a rock. So in the winter, when it's kind of cool, but not too cold, ants would take their brood. Brood is like the larva and the eggs and all that stuff, and put it under the rock, because the rock would get warmer, and then it will make the brood and like the eggs and larva and even pupa develop faster, which makes it really great for ant researchers to collect ant nests, because you just, turn over the rock and you collect everything into a little aspirator, and then you have queens and you have all that stuff. But once it gets kind of too dry, then they go deeper into the ground. So yes, they do develop faster when it's hot, but most species, I think, would. What else? Sweet bait would be more ideal. Again, some ants would prefer the sweets, like honey or sugar water or something like that, or a cookie or chocolate. And other ants would prefer some oil or some protein. And that's why usually if you want to attract different species, you'd use a few different baits. Peanut butter is a really good ant bait. And when I did some ant surveys, I just would spread that on like a popsicle stick and place that in the ground. And that was really, really good to bait the ants that I was looking for. But many species would be happy to do that. When I baited ants in the rainforest, then we just took like a piece of toilet paper and put oil, like cooking oil on that. And that was really attractive to ants. So different species like different things. And also sometimes it would depend on different, conditions and stuff. Okay.
Can you give us like kind of a mini rundown of which ants would come towards which types of bait around here? Like who would like the oil?
Let's do that in a separate,
Okay.
maybe separate document. We have 18 minutes left to go over ant identification through photographs.
Okay, so how about we look at some photos? Sure, yes, this one. Okay, so hopefully you could see my screen now.
I sure do.
Yeah, cool. Okay, so let's look at some.
Now the ones at the top of mine.
Yeah, because this is really nice.
Yeah, do the ones at the bottom there from like that one on the leaf on the left. Okay, that's fine.
So just a second, the one on the leaf on the left. Oh, cute. Look at that. That's a nice photo. Okay, so when you take photos of ants, obviously you want them busy doing something, so they won't be running around. unless you use your flash, and then you might be able to get them. So these look like Argentine ants to me. And let me explain why I think so. I don't know who took this one.
That's by Harley.
Harley, okay. So they don't look very large. Obviously, we don't have the scale here, but they seem rather small. They are brown to maybe dark brown, not very shiny, okay? They do seem to have little hairs or something, or not very shiny at least. And they kind of have long legs and antennas, okay? And a slender body shape. So that's why I would say these are probably Argentine ants, okay? And then let's look at this one. Oh, nice. So this one is Chromatogaster, the one with the acrobat ant with the heart-shaped abdomen. So you can see the cute little eye here, and the antenna. It's kind of brownish black, pretty shiny, and they hold their abdomen pretty high. You can see that it's connected with you remember the petiole, the little node there? Is connected to the abdomen really high, right here. And the abdomen, if you'd see it from above, you could see it's heart shape. So this is Chromatogaster. Awesome, cool ant. And then, by the way, both these ants would forage both on the ground and on vegetation. So you could see them here. What else? So this one is what we call an alate. So it's a winged, I think in this case it's a queen and not a male. They're very difficult to identify. I don't think I can. I think there was another one. No, this is something else. So I would guess this is a queen. It's pretty interestingly shaped and it seems very small. I have no idea what it is because the queens are very different than the workers in the same nest, in the same species. What I do when I try to identify them is I sometimes try to look at the species list for that area. So what kind of ants are found in that area? And then I'll start looking for queens of those different species. Okay. And what I find interesting about these is that I think it's kind of cool to tell a male from a female. So I think, queen from a male. I think this is a queen. So, okay, both queens and males would usually have wings at some point, but the queens will have these large mandibles. You see the large mandibles right here? Because they need to work. They need to create the nest. They need to dig and create a nest often, depending on the species. They need to take care of the first brood, so the first eggs that they would lay, depending on the species. So ants work with their mandibles. That's why they need big mandibles usually. And males don't do any work. Unlike, the cartoons, they don't do anything. They are just there for a few months, waiting for the right day to go out and look for a queen. And they don't do anything in the nest. So they'll have rather large eyes, just like the queen, so they can find a queen, but pretty small mandibles. Okay. And these ants, these are the amazing Pseudomyrmex. Yes, someone already wrote that. So Pseudomyrmex is that amazing ant that nests in little cavities usually in manzanitas. And this looks like it could be a manzanita. So it's a hole made by a beetle, and they will have a small nest inside that hole that might be connected to other holes on the same plant or on a closely nearby bush. Okay, very cool ants. The orange, elongated, large eye. The way they look is the way they walk is more like a wasp than an ant. And the way to find them is to look for manzanitas and then to look for like a dry branch or dry section of the manzanita and then look for these holes. And if it's warm enough outside, they might be active, because when it's cold, they're often not there. They'll be inside the nest and not really active. But when it's hot, you might see quite a few of them. And I was surprised to see that they're more common than I thought. Very cool ants.
Now, are there many of that genus Pseudomyrmex in this area?
In the area, there's just one species. It's the Pseudomyrmex apache, like Michael here wrote.
Okay.
In general, it's a not a very large family, but a subfamily. They have, so if you heard about the ants that live with, like inside acacia trees in Africa and South America and protected trees and have this complex interaction with these plants, then they belong to the same group.
That's the acacia, the ones that occur on acacia?
Yeah, it's a different
amazing.
species, but the same genus usually.
Okay.
Yeah, very interesting ants. And again, they belong to a different subfamily from the other ants that we saw. Very, very cool. Yeah, so try and look for them. They're awesome. So that's another queen probably of some ant. Yeah, I'm reading the details here. Probably a queen, again, big mandibles, large eyes. I don't know. I don't want to guess even because I'm not good with identifying these queens and males. Something useful to do with ants in general is to get a view from above. Like this is a great photo from above, but if you have a photo from the side, you could at least narrow it down to the subfamilies, because then you might be able to see the little nodes, the petiole or postpetiole or whatever she has. Yeah, and sorry, I might try and you know, look it up later. Oh, cute. Look at the Argentine ants. She's so cute. So this one, the one on the bottom is an Argentine ant worker. And then this one, I wonder if that's an Argentine ant queen. I'm not so sure. I'll have to look it up later.
No, I don't think it is.
It's not, right?
No.
So queens usually will have a very large thorax because that's where their flight muscles are. Okay, so that's why queen ants characteristically will have a very large thorax because they have plenty of flight muscles inside. And then this one just looks like a worker of something else. So
there were a bunch of those.
Of both species? Oh, hey, Debbie.
Well, the big hi. That was from that other one you did. That big one, there were a bunch of those, and there were also other Argentines.
Okay, interesting. So it's much larger than the Argentine ant, because this is obviously an Argentine ant.
Yeah, the thorax of the Argentine ant alates is really huge.
Yeah. Even though they don't really fly that much, because they reproduce slightly different.
Maybe not here.
Yeah, exactly. They might be flying in a different, you know, kind of life history style. Maybe in the native range, like some other invasive ants too. Debbie, do you have another photo of this ant?
I do.
A side view? Because I wonder if this is a carpenter ant. Because it's too large to be other things.
I put another photo up there.
Okay, so maybe we'll get to it and then let me know if it's that one. But otherwise, you know, we could also try it later and then we could post some answers here. Yeah, interesting anyway. And great photo. Okay, so this cute little one is not an ant. That's a female velvet ant, which is a wasp. It's Desimutilla, right? That's the common one around here. So this is a wasp that walk quickly around on the ground, and they're really awesome. They have these long hairs. They're really hairy. And they should have one of the worst insect stings.
Things.
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, the common name, one of the common names, there's two different common names. One is, well, there's actually more than that, but the interesting ones are cow killer and mule killer. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see why. I mean, I never got stung, but I mean, they're not aggressive at all. But I guess you can get stung if you mess up with them. But very cool. Okay, this one is a carpenter ant probably. Do we have another photo of the same one? No. So this is probably a carpenter ant. It's always better to have a side view as well, because then you could see if it's like the arc shape or if it has two humps like the Formica. But in general, you could see that it has this kind of wide, elongated head, probably large eyes right here, very large mandibles, and long legs, okay, and long antennas. Oh, and there's like a little larva here right behind it. So anyway, yeah.
Did you say that was a carpenter ant?
Yes, probably.
Okay.
Most probably. Carpenter ant. Yeah. and she's not very happy. Okay, and this is the red harvester ant. There are obviously lots of different species, but this is Pogonomyrmex. Okay, so we have two large genera of harvester ants in the area. One is the black harvester ant, which is Veromesser, usually Andre, that I showed you. And then this is the common one in like the peninsula and Santa Cruz Mountains and all this area, but and the South Bay. And the East Bay we see, and in the desert, and in a few places in the peninsula, you see Pogonomyrmex, which is the red harvester ant, which also has one of the worst like insect bites, by the way, even though it's really not aggressive at all, and it's actually difficult to get stung by it. But you know, some people are lucky. Just kidding. Anyway, this is the harvester ant. There are a few different species. I could look it up later. It's probably the most common one. But very cool. Really large ants. They have these big spines here in the back. You can see them. They have some hairs. They're not very shiny. Large eyes. And they go out foraging, collect seeds. Cool ants. From Elizabeth. Cool. Yeah. That's probably the nest entrance. Okay, and then around the nest you might find some seeds and stuff like that, and dead insects and things that they ate. And, ooh, who are these? Termite colony. Okay, so ants really like to eat termites. What you could see here, so this is an ant nest. I think these are Argentine ants. From the long antennas and legs and kind of brown elongated body shape. And all this mess here, these are pupa. Okay, so this is the pupa of these ants. And you can see that they already have all the adult organs, but they're just not ready yet. It's really cool. And you can see the eyes, okay, these two spots. And you could see the legs and antenna and all that. And this is what we call a callow worker. So this is a worker that just, emerged from the pupa and didn't get her cuticle hard yet. So it will change her colors later. These are alate ants. So these are, I don't know, queens or males, difficult to say without a good view of their head. But this is really cool. So when you look at an ant nest, you don't just see the workers, you see lots of other things as well. Very cool.
And one thing I didn't ask very well was, since that termite colony was just like 18 inches away, is that common? Do they kind of live in peace with each other? I didn't have a picture of the termite colony. Just trust me that it was there. Yeah, so I wouldn't say peace. I mean, they would probably eat them happily. And the termites would eat the ants if they could too. Because ants, like the pupa, is great food for everything. Oh, and by the way, the other thing here is that you could see that most pupa are the same size, right? These are workers. And then some are much larger, like this one. So this is probably a queen or a male. So anyway, it's just cool to look at an ant nest. But it was under a rock, right? Yeah. So when you look under a rock, often you'll find, more than one species of ants living underneath. And then you think, oh, do they live, peacefully together? Probably not. Probably before you remove the rock, the nests were separated. Okay, there was some boundary of like soil or something like that. And otherwise they wouldn't be able to coexist. They would just kill each other. Some ants could, but in general, they won't coexist, especially not with termites. So they eat each other. Okay? Yeah, what awesome photo. Oh, more ants from Debbie. Guessing. Okay, so we have this winter ant. This Argentine ant. And then, I don't know, this is really interesting, Debbie. I'm not sure, because this one really looks to me like Tapinoma, the odorous house ant. Well, I'll have to look up these photos later and compare them to other things. Because sometimes, what's that?
I might have some better ones.
Well, these are good photos. I would just sometimes I feel like I need to compare this to other photos. Like I have some ants in mind and then I need to compare that. And because it's different when you see the ants yourself and you see how they move and how they walk and how they smell than when you just look at a still photo. And by the way, what I do when I want to do something like that, I just wanted to show you quickly. Yeah, maybe. I mean, there's an Argentine ant there for sure, the one on the right. I'm just telling Eddie, who is writing the comments. But I want to show you what I do quickly. So what I would do is I would go to iNaturalist, which is my favorite place to go, even though it's not the best for ants because not too many people use iNaturalist. So iNaturalist is basically a place where you could share nature observations with other people. And you could also use it as, it's a huge database, then you could use it to get the data. So you could just go to a place, well, I won't show the whole process, but you could go to a place and narrow it down and then look for like all the species of ants in the Bay Area. This is just my observation, so I could just change it to everyone's. And I already asked just for ants, and I could just do something like this, have it here, research it just in this map, and then look at all the different species. Okay? So you could see like the most common one would be the Argentine ant, and then winter ant, the pavement ant, and this is the odorous house ant. It kind of looks like the one you have there. But anyway, it takes more time than the 2 minutes that I have to look at it now, so I'll be happy to do it later. Okay, Debbie, I'm sorry. I'll get back to you. But it could be odorous house ant with that one. And then, oh, these are Eddie's photos. So this is an Argentine ant, right?
Yeah, that's just a placeholder.
Yeah, yeah, no, very cute. Oh, wow, look at this fat carpenter ant. Okay, so you see this arc-shaped thorax? Okay, and then the carpenter ants, they have this kind of elongated face, almost like a triangle, and then pointy abdomen or gaster. Okay, yeah, but she's so big and fat. And this is, where is this from? Oh, okay.
El Dorado National Forest.
Yeah, okay, I'm not sure what it is. So it's a Formicine ant. You see it has just one little hump here, and it's very clear. And also the body shape, but with his, weird head and long antennas and stuff. But again, I'll have to go there and look at the different species that might be in that area and try and narrow it down. But I'm not sure about this one. And then this one is kind of cool. So this is Formica. This is a field ant, but it's not the most common one that you would see here, because the common one is that kind of reddish grayish one that we saw, the Formica mochi type of ant. This one I think is Formica subpolita or something close to that. I could type it down later because it's very shiny. Okay, and it even looks a bit like a carpenter ant more than a field ant. Okay, it has similar body shape and it's kind of round. It has more round abdomen than a carpenter ant, but mostly when you look at it from the side, subpolita. I'll correct it. When you look at it from the side, you could see that it has two humps. Okay, it doesn't have that arc shape like here. Okay, so this one is Formica, probably Formica subpolita. And that's the nest entrance. Yeah, cool ants. Not very common, but in some places you'll see quite a few nests of them. Yeah, cool. And this is a different kind, sorry?
Well, go ahead.
This is a different kind of Formica, probably. And this is more characteristic. So it's kind of elongated. It has this, it's difficult to see here, but this kind of elongated face, elongated abdomen, the two humps, large eyes, large, like long legs and antennas, and kind of hairy too, but short hairs. And then, ooh, who is that cute little one?
On the last one, did you have an ID for that?
Field ant, but I don't know the species. There are many different species, and many of them look like this. They're kind of grayish,
That's Formica.
Slightly velvety. Yeah, some Formica. Field ant is the common name. And
Okay.
this one, I don't know.
I thought that was a pavement ant.
Oh, it could be. Yeah, it's just difficult to say what the size is exactly. It definitely could be pavement ant because they have these kind of ridges on their head, like this one might have. It looks like it might be too small for a pavement ant. But the other thing we need to keep in mind is that a new nest where, you know, the queen is kind of young and just raising her first new workers, they'll be smaller than the regular workers. So even though pavement ants, all the workers in the nest are similar size, if it's a new nest, all the workers would be much smaller. So sometimes that's a bit confusing because you'll see something that you expect to be much bigger, but they're smaller. Maybe pavement ant. If you had another photo, then we could look at that. Okay? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I've got a question mark after it.
Okay, thank you. And then these cute ones are Chromatogaster. I don't know, for some reason I really like Chromatogaster. They're very cute ants. You can see here the heart-shaped abdomen on this worker. They have kind of boxy, squarish head here. The legs and antennas are not too long. And the size is slightly larger than Argentine ant, kind of like the size of winter ant, or maybe slightly larger. I think it's like 3 to 4 millimeters, something like that. Oh, and look at that. So having a few ants in the same photo is sometimes useful because you can have the side view and you can have the top view as well. So from the side, you could see where the petiole is connected to the abdomen right here. That it's kind of high, like I mentioned, that it's an important characteristic for Chromatogaster. So very cool. And what they're doing here is all ants' favorite activity, milking honeydew from aphids. So these are aphids on coyote brush. And wow, there's so many things here in the photo, but we see the ants milking these, not really, because yeah, we'll have to skip some of that. But they're milking honeydew from these aphids, and many ants would be happy to do that and get their honeydew. But they're attracted to coyote brush anyway because it has extra floral nectaries, so it produces nectar to attract ants, so the ants would forage on it and protect it from other things. And let's look at this one. So this looks like a different kind of field ant, or maybe similar to the other one we had before. Oh, Mike is here kind of late, but let's let him in. So these are field ants, Formica, the nest entrance probably. And we have more ants species. Ooh, what's that? So that looks like the inside of the Formica nest. Okay. So again, these long legs and antennas, large eyes, kind of shiny silvery look for these ants, but again, there's more than one species that look like that. And some of them are pretty common in specific areas and gone from others. And these are pupa of probably workers. They look the same size.
You said you gave us some characteristics of the Formica. What were those again?
So they have large eyes, long legs, long antenna. They have the 2 humps on the thorax. And what else? They kind of have a pointy head and a pointy abdomen. And just some hairs on it. This one is more velvety than others, but they're not all like that. And and there's some stuff about the behavior. So this is just looking at the photo. But when you look at them actually active in the field, then they walk very fast. They're active in the middle of the day when it's hot, and sometimes earlier too. But other ants are not able to be active when they are in the middle of the day when it's super hot. They'll still be outside. And they usually don't make trails, so you won't see more than a few of them in one area unless you're very close to the nest. So yeah, cool ants. Ooh, where's this one? Alameda.
That's the same as the one that was on my arm.
Okay. So I don't know. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just not clear enough to me. I'm not sure these are pavement ants. If you have more photos, maybe share them later and I'll try to have another look, because you see there's different colors here, I think. This is not characteristic of pavement ants, but I'm not sure. It might be. difficult for me to tell because it's not very clear. You know, the details are not clear.
Okay, Mara,
Yeah.
past our time. It's 11:09.
Okay.
I know people are still interested because they're still here. But if you could check the chat, there was a post from someone about something on their iNaturalist account.
Oh, that's another field end. I guess you can all just click on that instead of me sharing again.
Oh, yeah.
For Marianne. So yeah, you could just look at that photo. This is a Formica, a field end. Yeah, someone identified. So it kind of looks like the Formica mocki, which is, you know, the common big field ants that we see around here, but there are a few species that look alike. So it's difficult to tell ants for species. And I know on iNaturalist and other places, people really want to get things identified to species, but it's just often difficult to tell exactly the species. You know, you actually need to collect it or to have the exact right angle or something like that. With other ants, we might just have, you know, enough info. There's just one species in the area or something like that, so it's easier. Yeah, but cool ants. I would agree.
So let's start wrapping up.
Yes.
I think people have gotten quite a bit out of what you've been providing. I really like going through the photographs. That makes a lot of sense. That people have things they want to know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
The natural history was very good, and going through the different insects, the different ants that are in the Bay Area was very helpful. But people may have comments. If there are any questions for Merav before we wrap up, go ahead and ask those now.
Yeah, and if you'd like, please post more photos on that folder, or you could also post them to iNaturalist and tag me. My username is Merav. I was the first one. So, you know, you could tag me and I could try and identify your ants. Sometimes it would be kind of general because, you know, I don't want to risk it, but I could try. And yeah, and thank you so much for coming. I think it was really fun.
Okay.
And I would love to help people ID stuff, or if you have any questions or, you know, anything else.
I've seen some things coming up in the chat. Something about was the plant identified?
It was coyote brush. Okay, coyote brush is a very common bush around here, and it's very attractive to ants.
Again, I'm seeing somebody saying excellent presentation. So thanks again for everybody coming. I'm going to ask Merav to stay on a little bit, but if the rest of you would log out. We're going to be doing more stuff like this in the future. Merav will send out a list of different resources about Jasper Ridge and how to get involved with ants more in the Bay Area. So if you haven't provided your email address already, send your email to me in the chat, or you can email eddie@bugpeople.org, and you can spell Eddie any way you want. Eddie@bugpeople.org, and I'll make sure that Merav gets that list. Okay, thanks for everyone. Thanks everyone for coming, and we'll see you later in the Insectverse.
Thank you.